So quick announcement before we start. I've been speaking with Don, my the co-teacher and Dhammakai teacher on the last retreat that we did, and we want to do another two, either 2 or 3 day. Still figuring it out, but we're planning for the first weekend of May. So it's quite, it's a couple, or yeah, it's like 3 months from now or 2 months from now. But that is the weekend that we have scheduled. So, and we're putting the content together, the teaching material. It's going to be on a specific discourse and subject in Theravada Buddhism called the Four Bases of Spiritual Power. The first one is zeal or desire. So this is your your drive to practice, and one of the other ones is intent. Another one is investigation. So this particular discourse explains how these four qualities, they really become the power behind meditation and behind awakening. So that will be the subject of the class. It's a full discourse, so it will take a full 2 days to explain. Don and I are still going to figure out if we're going to start on Friday evening or Friday afternoon. So it'd be like Friday late afternoon, we do the intro talk, and we can do a long sit, and then practice and have our discussions all of Saturday and Sunday. Probably an element that we'll introduce that we didn't have incorporated before are the one-on-one teacher interviews. Depends on how many people are in the retreat, but if the number is not super high, then we'd be able to arrange and make time for that. That everyone have between 5 and 10 minutes with one or both of us to discuss what's happening in the practice. In the last retreat, there were a few people that we would have liked to give more one-on-one feedback with them in regards to their meditation and what was happening, but because of the busyness of the retreat, and we hadn't scheduled that that in advance, we weren't able to get to it. So then we just had to email people back and forth afterwards. So yeah, so there'll be some adjustments or modifications, but yeah, we'll be aiming for the first weekend of May, and I'll create a Google form link that people can use to join like last time, and I'll create the flyer for it and everything. So yeah, it'll be a second retreat Don and I have done. So definitely looking forward to that. That's the only announcement for now. Yeah, we could begin our Q&A. If you have questions, you could either put them in the chat or just raise your hand or unmute yourself. Alan, who's David? I don't think you've ever seen me with my face shaved, huh?
No, never. That's why I was like, who's this boy that's that's leading the Dharma talks and meditations? Yeah, no, I've never seen you bald.
Yeah. It cuts off at least 5 years from my age.
So how old are you now? 16? 13?
Right. Did you just start? I think you're a little too young to teach. good. This is a great question. Yeah, thank you for asking this one, Kelly. What's the difference between desire and a calling towards something? A calling towards something is a desire. So what's the difference between a desire that's coming from our sense of self, or a mundane desire, versus a calling that is coming from the level of intuition or instinct? What's the difference between desires that are the products of our thinking and our concepts and our cravings, versus those desires, or mm, those pulls, those callings that seem to come from outside of us, or that or seem to be received? all all feelings and all mental formations have textures. So desire, craving is a spectrum. There's our desires for worldly things, or desires for material things, and there's our desires for spiritual things, desire for liberation, desire for freedom. They're ultimately desire, ultimately motivation, but the flavor of that particular desire, the flavor of that particular want, may be different. So the calling, those intuitive pulls, that sense that you have to go in this specific direction, or you have to find out what that is about. The texture or the flavor of those is, it's as if you've received that from from above, or it's as if that has emerged from deep within, from this place inside that you can't exactly put your finger on or explain. The calling is always mysterious. You don't exactly know why. It's beyond your conceptual mind. Whereas craving, desires for a specific sense object, for example, that is always explainable as to why you want that specific thing. Why you want a specific material outcome, which is fine. It's fine to want material things, or to acquire them if you need them, to make your life manageable and make it possible to have a life where you can practice Dharma and study these things. But the signature, or the texture of that craving, or of that want, is very different from the kinds of intuitive callings and the kind of intuitive pulls that arise as if you're receiving them, or as if they're emerging from the depths of your being, this kind of thing. Something emerging from the depths of your being is very different than, I'm really attracted to that person and I want to do something about it. So it's a completely different texture. So the interesting thing is that these signatures, or these textures, you could call them frequencies, the lines that they are can become crossed. So like you can interpret a mundane desire as a calling if you're not clear, or if you're subject to delusion. we're all subject to delusion to a degree, but I mean more so than usual. In this particular case, like, for example, if you have a problem with drinking or alcohol, that need or that want for it can be so strong, so overwhelming that it feels like a calling. It feels like, hey, I need to be led in this destructive path for some spiritual purpose. But just because a thing feels a certain way doesn't mean that it is that way, or that how a thing or what a thing really is can even be known. So it takes discernment, it takes wisdom, it takes clarity of mind to distinguish clearly between these mundane cravings and the deeper calling. The thing about the deeper calling is I've found generally that the deeper calling is inescapable. Whereas cravings, they may appear to be inescapable. It may appear to be this thing that you can't stop thinking about for a time. But the thing with mundane desires as well is that there's no real fulfillment from them. So you may be satiated for a time, or you may feel like that anxiety has been relieved by getting what it is that you wanted, but we wouldn't call that fulfillment at all. So fulfillment is the actualization of purpose, the actualization of the calling. And I would argue that that's really the only source of fulfillment. The reason that life is empty and not in the not in the Buddhist sense, right? But I mean the sense that things are meaningless, or that we're kind of just wandering through life, and that nothing really has that quality of aliveness or presence anymore. That a sense that we're dead inside is a result of the misalignment with purpose, and therefore the abdication of fulfillment, the inability to be fulfilled is a result of either not hearing the calling, not knowing the calling, or knowing and hearing the calling but refusing it, which are all things we've all done. There were times where we couldn't figure it out, didn't know what to do, mind was too unclear to discern what to do. And there were times where it was very clear what to do, but we couldn't do it. And both produce suffering. So in the first case, to know what to do, we surrender our attempt to figure it out. And we become still, and we wait for the answer to appear. And the second example, where we know what to do, but we either can't or we're unwilling to do it, we gradually work on the process and increase our capacity until we're able to do it. Because if it is a real calling, it will be persistent. Many of you have been practitioners for your whole life. Your Dharma, this Dharma, is your calling. If you ignore it, you suffer. If you know you should put in more, but you don't, you suffer. If you know you should study with greater depth, if you know you should put more in your meditation, but you don't, you suffer. If you know you should ease up on the gas and you should let go and you should stop trying so hard, you suffer. One of the greatest lessons I was ever taught in the higher dimensions was if you live according to what you/we have decided upon, and this refers to the decisions or determinations that were made for your physical incarnation. If you live by what you have decided upon, then your life will be full of happiness and joy. If you don't live in accordance with what you've decided upon, your life will be full of misery and suffering. Suffering is by design to move you back to your original plan. We love you. We're always here for you. Goodbye. Just those 3 words or those 4 words, suffering is by design, can teach us everything. That the suffering that we're experiencing is always the teaching. You know, the first noble truth is the basis for the 3 that follow it. Life is suffering. The cause of suffering, which is craving. The cessation of suffering, which is nirvana. And the path that leads to the cessation, which is the Eightfold Path. You know, we can also see that or hear that as the truth is that our condition is sufferable. The second truth is that this sufferable condition is what we call samsara. The third truth is that there's an end to this sufferable condition called samsara, and that end is called nirvana. The end of clinging and craving, and the path to that end is the Eightfold Path: right view, right intention or thought, right action, right livelihood, right speech. Right mindfulness, right concentration. There's a couple I missed. But yeah, suffering is by design is like, it doesn't mean that every area has to be perfect. Every area, every dimension of our lives has to be perfect, but it is a good barometer. It's a good measure of how we're doing in a given area, right? I mean, if you're physically suffering, you're 300 pounds, it's a good measure for how your health is going. So what those kinds of lessons or what those kinds of transmissions taught me was that there was always something that was guiding this process. There's so many teachers, they just call it the mystery or the higher self or the lineage, and the unexplainable things, they just leave it up to that. And what I found was that this mystery or lineage, or what we call the the masters or the higher beings. Theravada Buddhism, they say the devas. May the devas protect you. This sort of thing, the protectors of the Dharma. I was very curious as to what their nature was. And I found that there really is essentially a hidden hand, a North Star, a deeper nature that is of benefit and guidance to every person. And even in the moments of a person's death, when I had experiences where my consciousness was phased to theirs, and I would experience their process, or their dying process. Actually, I found that it really was true that at the end of a person's life, a light appears and speaks to them, and guides appear to help them. That really does happen, and that light, that voice that spoke to them, was the light and voice of a deeper part of them that was guiding them through the entirety of their incarnation. The times unexplainable things happened, the times you were guided along a new path, or the times that impossible things transpired to help you, those did not happen by accident. If they didn't happen by accident, it means they had a cause. And that cause is loving, or it is all loving. Yeah. The calling comes from that cause. You know, your life is a certain way, and then suddenly everything changes. You have an experience, or you have an insight, or just one day the calling is born, just bursts forth. So the standard worldly, or the standard material answer to that question is all that comes from your genes. You know, it's like, it's a material thing. It's just, we don't know why we like the things that we like, or why we have the inclinations that we have, or why they appear at certain times and disappear at others. But we reduce it to genetic disposition. It's really more like a soul disposition, a disposition that comes from the soul, from intelligence, an intelligence that is beyond our flesh and outside of our experience of time. There's a quote in the Bible that says, flesh shall not inherit the kingdom. This thing I'm referring to, in a way, can be regarded as an aspect of the kingdom. Usually I refer to the kingdom as recognizing reality, right? In my Father's house, there's many rooms, but when we take in the relative sense of what we regard conventionally the kingdom to be, the place of fulfillment, the place of immeasurable love, the place of salvation, the place where the answers exists, the place where the reason for why we were born can be known, the place in which the future can be seen, the level of us or the level of being that is outside time. You know, in a relative sense, if that isn't the kingdom, then what is? uh, a place where the whys can finally be answered. Maybe not why existence is here, but why we're here. What we were before, what we really are now, what we will be after. When they say those answers are within, the place which you find them, at least the place I arrived at, frightened me. What that inner reality was like, who or what it was that was there, changed the way I saw things. Yeah, every tradition talks about the inner masters or the inner planes or the inner realities or the circle of dervishes around the heart. They all use different words to describe these things. And those descriptions fit the particular person, the particular culture, the particular place and time that person was speaking from or that person was living in. So the appearances may be different, but the information is the same in the sense that the same knowledges are accessible or accessed. Yeah, desire comes from, David said, desire comes from the ego, whereas the calling is from source or higher self. Yeah, exactly. The desires always have to do with, the cravings always have to do with objects in time, and callings from the higher self also have to do with objectives in time. But those impulses come from a place outside of time. And these cravings for this and craving for that, it's always just coming from me. It's always just coming from you, you know, the you that's your name. Depending on your past and depending on the future that you want. And the calling for whatever it is, you have the sense that it doesn't come from you, and you have the sense that you have the direct experience that it can even be at odds with what you as a person want. It could be in contradiction to what you think is right or what you think is optimal or what you think is the best thing to do. It can defy your logic. It can defy your feelings. It can defy any way that you would approach it. It compels you to act, to explore, to consider. It compels you. And what I found is that the calling, it leads you to truth and away from ignorance. It leads you to wisdom and away from delusion. It leads you to fulfillment and away from discontent. It leads you to love and away from hate. It inclines towards the good, and it is the good. And that's the difference. You know, it's like being a mother or a father. Like you may set things up so that your kids can learn difficult lessons, or you may let them endure suffering a little longer so that they can learn. But it's ultimately so that they can learn. Whereas the lower nature, quote lower nature, or these fleeting transient desires, they can lead you to absolute ruin. You know, when we look at alcoholism, addiction, vices, or vexations, if you've been in that, or if you've seen someone go through that, you can watch how it's almost like those things and those forces want to take everything from a person. Want to stop, but you can't. Want to change, but you can't. Want to let go, but you can't. Want to not pick up that bottle, but you can't. And that pull, that craving, and that vice, it comes with these voices that initially weren't your own, these thoughts that initially weren't your own, these inclinations and behaviors that initially weren't your own. And gradually, they rob you of everything. Until you have nothing left, and you're living on the street, and until you become a student of David, and and there you go. So, and then I'll, yeah, this is also the better question, is how to better hear the call. And I touched on it for a moment, but it's like we can practice meditation a lot, but meditation isn't the only way to hear this deeper nature. I mean, before meditation became popular, the way to hear it was through prayer. So it's mostly the surrender of the sense of self, or the surrender of the need for an outcome. If you can live out the words, let thine will be done, if you can really get out of the way, you can begin to hear. But how is it that you get out of the way? And it does come to a point of meditation. Exodus says, be still and know that I'm God. So the meaning of be still is really the whole point of meditation. How do we become still enough to know what to do? How can we become still enough to cut through our confusion. The reason that there isn't stillness is because of the presence of the 5 hindrances. The 5 hindrances are the chaos and the confusion in the mind. Without the 5 hindrances, the mind is clear and there is no chaos and confusion, disturbance and turbulence in the mind. So the mind is moving a lot. It's very vacillating, oscillating everywhere. That's the restlessness hindrance. The mind is blurry or unclear. It can't grasp the meditation object. That is the hindrance of sloth or lethargy, torpor. Outside of meditation, that translates to you can't seem to get a grasp of the thing. You can't seem to get a grasp of the problem. The big one, which is the one that is the most sufferable for a spiritual practitioner, is doubt. That is the 5th hindrance. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to get past this. I'm confused. That is doubt. So how to perceive the inner impulses or the calling is to master stillness, to master meditation. If we meditate 10 sessions and we were only still and quiet and came to a place of tranquility in 2 of those 10, that means that we need to investigate why that's the ratio. Why is it that 80% of the sessions are dominated by restlessness and doubt? Or why is it that 80% of the sessions are dominated by lethargy or sleepiness? Or why is it that 80% of the sessions are dominated by remorse, by guilt, by discontentment? Doing meditation, even if experiencing those things, is better than not. But the 5 hindrances are the obstacles to clarity. They are what's in the way. So what we can examine to come to a deeper stillness and thereby hear the calling, in what I'm learning now, it's called hearing the one that knows, the inner teacher. And there's not just one inner teacher. But in my case, for example, I'll just lay this out. The only, hindrance that I've really had for the last couple of years, at least in meditation, is sleepiness. That's the only one. So it means that start the meditation, first 15 minutes, it's solid. And then this really just intense sleepiness arises. And you're no longer able to hold on to the meditation object. So about a week ago, I just asked the inner guidance. I was like, give me a solution to this, because it passes at some point, but it's like a huge waste of time. 2 hours to get past it or whatever. It's just a waste of time. So how can I cut through this particular hindrance with greater speed? No answer for a while. Nothing came up, because I don't try to conceptually figure out. So I don't try to conceptually figure out the answers to these questions. Then one day, a week later, I'm meditating, and I just hear this little voice inside that said, stay in the gap after the exhalation. Like stay in the gap after the exhalation. So I tried that. And then the inhale happened again, and then the exhale happened again, and then it just said stay. To keep extending the duration of the exhalations naturally, of course, not like using force or anything, but just naturally. And then I noticed that the meditation became predominantly resting in these gaps of breathlessness between the breaths. And then bang, my sleepiness disappeared. So this kind of inner, I don't know, energy in the system, in the body started to turn on. And with that, a lot of clarity, and then that dispelled the sleepiness. And it's been working ever since. So a problem I've had for 3 years was solved this way. I asked, and eventually I received. And strangely enough, the word anapanasati, which is the title for mindfulness of breathing, Theravada Buddhism, the Anapanasati Sutta, the discourse on the mindfulness of breathing. The word apana means breathing or breath, A-P-A-N-A. In Sanskrit and Pali, it means breathing. Sati means mindfulness. And in Pali, likely Sanskrit as well, when you put the prefix an in front of something, that means negation or cessation. So anatta is the negation of atta, or the cessation of atta. Atta is self. Anatta is the doctrine of no self, right? So anapanasati actually means mindfulness of the cessation of breathing. When your mind gets still, when you enter concentration, the breath begins to come to a standstill or becomes imperceptible. The breath becomes very long and subtle, begins to disappear. So bang, in that moment, it just dawned on me. That even that word anapanasati was referring to something that I didn't consider that it referred to. Because in the discourse, it doesn't mention anything about the cessation of breathing. It just says when you inhale, you know your inhalation. When you exhale, you know your inhalation, you know your exhalation. If you inhale long, you know the inhale is long. If you exhale long, you know the exhale is long. But it doesn't directly say anything about this breathlessness, even though that's the title of the discourse. So things which you didn't know, things which you didn't understand, can be revealed if you get quiet enough. Or if you ask and then when you receive, you actually act on it. That's the thing. Like, oh, how do I receive more guidance? Well, like, we'll start acting on the guidance you do get. And there you go. What do I know I'm supposed to do, or what do I know I should start doing, but I haven't? And it could be any mundane thing. What are things that you know are on your plate, but that you ignore? Many of those things that are on your plate are put there by the guidance. So as you work with them, more is revealed. How do I hear clearer messages? Or how do I receive more direction? You refine your receptor. You remove the 5 hindrances. You overcome them. They are a thing to overcome. Have no mistake about it. The vacillation caused by doubt, the vacillation caused by restlessness, the vacillation caused by guilt, by remorse. These formation, these hindrances, they occupy your mind and they make it difficult to discern a calling. And they make it so that even if you are able to discern it, you doubt it. They make it so even if you are able to discern it, you can't focus to actually do what you've come to know that you need to do. This one thing appears, it becomes very evident. Like, yeah, I should really forgive that person. And I've been holding on to this for a long time. It's not helping me. I mean, the guy's dead. That's how much it's not helping me. He's dead. She's dead. The resolution only exists in myself. And we know that's what we need to work on. But because of the hindrances, we become preoccupied with other things. Because of the doubt, we let ourselves get sidetracked. Because of the restlessness, we let ourselves get sidetracked. Or better put, we don't actively work against the getting sidetracked. The nature of attention, the nature of awareness is that whatever awareness is applied to reveals itself. You have a sensation in the center of your chest, or you have this feeling in your stomach of discomfort. If you apply awareness to that feeling, the sensations, the nature of that feeling begins to unfold, becomes revealed, begins to open. That's the nature of the meaning of the word investigation, right? We initially become aware of something, but if we maintain our awareness on that thing, more and more of that thing begins to open, begins to reveal itself. What was initially not perceived at the surface is perceivable in its depth. But you can only reach the depth of that given phenomena or that given thing by maintaining the application of awareness to it. What we don't know or what we can't figure out is just a matter of attention, awareness. What is this doubt really about? Why am I always in doubt? How much time have we actually dedicated to directing bare attention on that doubt in our system, in our physiology? How many seconds? The accumulated seconds, the accumulated from one moment to the next of looking at that doubt, noticing that doubt, of seeing into that doubt, of feeling into that doubt, or whatever it is, fear, the pain, is what reveals it, is what allows for insight into its nature to occur. If you don't look at something, how can you understand it? You know, they say the truth sets us free. The reason we're subject to something again and again and again is because we don't actually understand it. We know it at the surface. We know that, this makes me suffer. But what the thing actually is, how deep the root of that affliction actually is, we may not know. And the reason therapy works, the reason meditation works, the reason entheogens work, or plant medicine, or whatever it is, the reason those things work is because they take us into the root of that thing. They take us into the why it's making us suffer, and what it actually is at a very, very deep level. And when that's seen, that when that's seen, suffering can be absolved. Oftentimes I've been asked, like, why can't I let this go? Why can't I drop this one thing? And it's often because that letting go is to let something go, we've had to let it be sufficiently. It's like you want to let go of anger, but your system, your body doesn't want to let it go. You want to stop acting this way, but for some reason you can't not act that way. And being subject to anger is not the same as making space for anger. Reacting out of anger is not the same as really sitting with the reason that you're angry, really going back in time to where that anger began. So of course it's important to, sometimes we do need to get things off our chest, but just because we talk about something doesn't mean that we get to the root of it. Yeah, all of these very key problematic areas in our lives. We all know what the problems are. But it's another thing to study those problems. Like the same way that some of you invested thousands or hundreds of hours in a particular subject, or in a particular skill, or in a particular trade, in a particular interest. How many hours of awareness did we apply? How many hours of bare attention have we applied directly to our problems? Talking about it doesn't count. Writing about it doesn't count. Reacting to it doesn't count. I mean, we're going straight into it. Or we're using some modality to go straight into it. That counts. But generally, the number of hours is pretty low in most cases. Because most of the hours we think are attributed to it are actually hours of suffering. It's like, yeah, I've been working on this for a long time, but suffering with this for a long time, but it just doesn't stop. The suffering and the being subject to something is not the same as applying awareness and discriminative attention to it. You know, that's the last thing I'll say before we start to take a break and then we start our sit. When my dad died, I really spent a lot of time sitting with that. And it still took 7 years. But I'm an emotional person, you know. If I didn't sit with it the way that I did, it would have taken even longer to come to some kind of peace. You know, to get to the point where when you think about that person, you're happy. When for so many years, you know, you can't even look at the old pictures. You know, how do you get to that? You know, grief is a yoga, disappointment is a yoga, disillusionment is a yoga, confusion is a yoga, doubt is a yoga. But we don't see them that way. We just see them as things we're being subject to, but they're actually teachers. You can see them like the wrathful manifestations of the Bardo. Like, if suffering is by design, how is this part of the design? What role does this thing play in the design? Yeah, David.
Glad you brought up your father. At the end of ceremony, you know, I was experiencing the absence of father in the ceremony, and my mother came. She's deceased. I mean, I experienced her, felt her presence. There's a lot of talk about, you know, the divine mother, but I did not sense father, and thought about it interpersonally. Absence of my own father, his death, not being around when I was growing up, neglectful, could create a story. Sensed it from others that were in the room. A mother and son actually sat in ceremony together. Was wondering where the father was. So when I said it, I just wanted to speak it, and of course, there's dead silence. I don't know how people heard it or received it. And then I realized father was in the stillness, in the gaps, in the absence. And for me, the teaching was even when I feel that my father is not present, and even when I experienced him as absent, which he was a great amount of the time, the truth is I've always been held in the Father's presence, and I don't want to get too woo woo or even I don't even know what it means any longer to say, but to be able to trust that I am being held. I mean, you talk about radiant presence, and whether I want to call that God, higher self. I mean, the terms are kind of irrelevant at this point, but that's something awareness, Rigpa, something is holding me, me with quotation marks around it, and even when I doubt it and I don't necessarily trust it, Father is always, always, always with me. So I don't know. I'm glad you brought your father present in this moment. And I just wanted to share that with you because I know you can resonate with what I'm saying about father and absence, presence, and so on and so forth, whatever that might mean in samsara or the relative sense. So thanks, brother.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, David. Just to that point with the awareness revealing the truth. Initially, and this is something that people say this, but it's different when it emerges from inside you and it clicks. But the things that we blame people for are, whatever the type of person is. Like right now, it's really cool to hate on billionaires and success and money. Like that's the trend now. The trends are always changing, and we have this sense that one group of people actually has more agency than another. But when we really examine that, we know that's impossible. That they're all subject to delusion. Everyone's subject to delusion and to ignorance. And everyone's responding out of suffering. Everyone. The people we don't like, the people we can't stand, the people we disagree with, everyone's responding to suffering. Everyone's acting from suffering. And everyone thinks they're doing the right thing. When I was first going through the grief, I blamed my father for not being present in my life and for not being able to get over his addiction, as if he didn't try to stop, right? This is the thing. We blame people as if they haven't tried to change, as if they haven't tried to be different. But if you ask, of course, people will say they've tried. They say, I've tried, but I can't stop. So this notion of blame is just equally destroyed when you really look at the processes and look at the machinations, because it's rare that anyone really has a moment of true awareness and true clarity that arises before a choice is made. I mean, in my case, I didn't even discover awareness till I was 27, 26, in the dawn of awakening. I didn't know. I had no recognition of awareness until that day. So my whole life was on autopilot. My whole life was reacting to conditions. And everyone's like that. Everyone's reacting to conditions. Everyone's trying to figure it out. Everyone's trying to get through the day. But, we blame groups of people as if they're not subject to the same rules. When if we look closely, everyone's subject to the same rules. Same ignorance, same delusion, same sense of self. Same suffering, it just looks different. So when I saw through applying awareness to grief, it was an intuitive insight that came up. It was obvious, people had mentioned it before, but when it really arose and I really saw that he tried. I forgave him pretty quick after that. All right. Let's take a 10, and then we'll proceed with our long sit, everyone.